Yo, I'm staying where we getting crazy love. My noisy neighbors live just above me up in 13A. It's Jama A Day. The super say he gon'
All right, y'all. Welcome back. We are moving along with the last bits from the Old Testament before we move on to the New Testament. And yesterday we talked about that remnant of the Israelite people that left Babylon once the Persians conquered them, and now are moving into the Promised Land once again, only to find that things aren't so great over there. The first thing that they find is that when they get back to the south, their neighbors to the north, the Samaritans, right? The Samaritans have kind of cemented themselves as the people up in the north now. The Samaritans are not fond of this remnant that returns. And there's a couple things you need to know about the remnant that returns, is that these are the most serious Jews, right? These are the ones that say, our identity is tied to the temple, our identity is tied to the things of God. We need to go back and we need to preserve and rebuild that lifestyle, because that's who we are as a people, right? We are God's people. We need to follow His laws and instructions. So they have a lot of laws and instructions to preserve that unity, right? We're going to talk about this as a purified Israel, right? Purified from foreign influence. And so one of the things that they do is that they kind of bar any kind of contact with the Samaritans up north. Because the Samaritans at this time, they worshiped God, the one true God, but they also worshiped some other gods, right? They had this both and kind of concept, and not in a good way here, right? They thought you could worship God as a God. You could say this is God, our Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Or you could say both, right? You could say we believe in that God. We also believe in Baal, etc., right? And for these remnant of Jews that returned, that wasn't good enough, right? That wasn't something that they were going to tolerate, having just left this Babylonian exile. So they made sure that they never interacted with them. Well, this got the Samaritans in the north upset, and so they write a strongly worded letter to the Persians, basically convincing the Persians to not keep their promises, right? So to not let them build the temple, not to give them permission to build the temple, but also not to fund the temple with the public monies, right? Or the government monies. And so what you end up with is this group of Jews who thought they were coming home. They've got this king that's going to support them. They've got the funds to rebuild the temple the way it's really meant to be built. And what they find is Jerusalem is in ruin. Their neighbors to the north are not happy that they're back. They themselves are trying to kind of isolate from the outside world. And now they have no money and no permission to build the temple. So what do? Well, they build it anyway. And this is an exact replica of the temple. I just typed in Minecraft Jerusalem temple. This is obviously not what it looks like, but it's not a great looking temple because it's not. We already talked about the theological reasons, right? It doesn't have the Ark of the Covenant. Holy of Holies will be empty. But now it's going to be built, without any permission, without any finances. So it's just from the people themselves, which these are guys that have been in exile. They don't have a lot, right? Now you got the prophet of Ezra, though, and he's going to come in and at least, you would say, do the best that he can in the time that is given to him. This right here is just a album cover from an album that you really should go listen to. These guys, Better Than Ezra, are from Louisiana. I think they mostly hang out in Baton Rouge. But this album, In the Blood, that's the first song of the album. Deluxe it's a phenomenal album from the early 90s, one of the best rock albums out there, and again, local rock band. Nothing to do with the Ezra we're talking about, but they wrote that they were better than Ezra, and whether they're talking about other Ezras or the Ezra we're talking about, I don't know. I never looked that up. The Ezra that we're talking about, though, his goal is, look, we're going to purify Israel. We're going to purify the Promised Land. We're going to get us back to what we're supposed to be. And so he bans intermarriage with anybody that is not a practicing Jew. And so he's like, look, if you are married to someone that is not a practicing Jew, they're donezo, because he realized that all of these foreign faiths kept coming in through these intermarriages, right? So, you think back to even the time of Solomon, right? When Solomon's wife wants to worship other gods, they start worshiping other gods. When you had some of the other kings, especially if you remember Jezebel, who brought in the Baal worship again, big time. So Ezra says, no more of that. We're going to focus our practices only on God. And then another way that he was able to do this was that he edited the Torah down to the version that we have today. So you got to think the Torah is the most important writings for the Jewish people. It's it's their rock, their foundation in terms of their literature. And he wanted everyone to be able to know it, right? So he edits it down to a standard that everyone can then know and read and be familiar with what it is that God's message is all about. But some new problems come up even with all this. And that is where we're going to end for today. And these new problems arise of, okay, the community is actually thriving. The things that Ezra is doing work. They create this great identity, they're more isolated on themselves, but they no longer have a pagan worship problem. The problem they have now is an interpersonal problem, that some of the Jews now are growing quite rich, some are still quite poor, and the rich Jews are now kind of abandoning the faith, and they've kind of ascended back up into society, and they are oppressing the poorer Jews. At the same time, too, they are not making any good offerings at the temple. They're not bringing the best of what they have. They're kind of basically, once they've become successful, they've forgotten God, and you can already start to see the exact plot line playing out again. When they were poor and just a remnant, they turned back to God. They isolate themselves and they turn back to God. Now that they're growing back a little bit better, they even start interfighting with themselves. And the main point from this part of the story is God is not pleased again with this contradiction, because he's saying, like, look, it is one thing to know the Torah. It's one thing to be faithful to me in name, but you need to be faithful to me in action and within your heart. And so you need to love your neighbor, right? You need to respect each other, this dignity of the human person. Like, Jerusalem is not going to be what it's meant to be if there's this division on the inside. And if you remember, we said that the Israelite story is kind of this microcosm of the whole human story, that the divisions within Israel almost always reveal something about the divisions within our heart. The promise of who we are, as made in the image likeness of God, cannot be fully revealed or fulfill the promise for which it was created if there's these internal divisions within us, right? Things that pull us away from our true mission. And so if you check out the promises that were made of the Davidic covenant and Jerusalem, of being this great city that will last forever and the reign of David will live on, it seems kind of at the end of the Old Testament, this is not the case. In fact, things don't seem that much better than they were before. And that's kind of that same lens we ended yesterday with. That, okay, things are good, but they're not what they should be. Or they're clearly not what they were, and they're clearly not where they should be yet. And that's kind of where we're going to end today's lesson too, of that the promise of Israel, the promise of its mission, especially Jerusalem as sort of this, remember David wanted to make it the shining symbol of both political and religious unity, has yet to be fulfilled. So who's going to fulfill it? You can start to see how this is leading into the New Testament, right? I don't want to give away the spoilers of who will fulfill these missions and promises, but suffice it to say that there's a growing sense of this isn't quite it, is it? We're going to see how it gets fulfilled in the future. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Make sure you answer those questions, and I will see you tomorrow in the next one.